Sterling, at last count, did we have 22 participants? Is that correct? 23?
We're at 24 now.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Are you able to hear me okay? Perfect, okay. I'll be letting people in as things trickle in, but it's 1 o'clock, and to honor everybody's time, first and foremost, welcome to the first PPI, like shout out. We've been wanting to do this for a while. I really see a few people in here, like faces that I know, and a whole bunch of names that I also know. You're welcome to have your video off or on. That's optional for you. If you want to have it on, great. If you want to have it off, that's fine. For sake of our speaker, Sarah, I'm going to let you decide if you'd like to have, I assume you'd like to have everyone muted during your presentation, but if you would advise people how you'd like it to be for questions or comments, I'll let you give those directions when we get going. Before we introduce Sarah, I wanted to really give a big shout out in particular to the legislative group. Mute everybody here. So Lauren, Sterling, Brent Kaufman, Shelley DeWitt, Sophie Rindlisbacher, and April Zamipka are all on our wonderful legislative committee. And I have to say thank you to all of you. Utah PPI has been something in the mindset for a while, and we're finally here. So thank you to the U.S. Legislative Committee for their work. Lauren, are you okay taking it over and doing our wonderful introduction to Sarah?
I am. Thank you, Bethany. So I'm gonna screen share my slideshow really quick and just get started. Oh, let me screen share though. You're the host, Bethany. First, I just want to say thank you everyone for being here. I know that we might have some more trickle in. We had, I think, a little bit over 20 people register, which I was super happy about. So thank you everybody for being interested in advocacy and wanting to come hear from Sarah, because she has some really awesome, knowledge to pass on to us. So let me just talk about briefly what our agenda is going to be today. Well, first, let me start with our raffle winners. Our raffle winners for today were Sean, Marcia, Brent, Mary, and Tiffany. So yay, you guys, for registering. You will get an Amazon gift card sent out today after our training. Most of today is going to be Sarah. So yay to Legislative Committee, but also mostly yay to Sarah for being willing to be with us today, because she's going to be the majority of our presentation today, kind of bookended by Legislative Committee finishing up just talking about our communication plan with our members, our priorities this year, and Day on the Hill. So that's sort of our agenda today. I'm going to be moderating for Sarah, and it's a small group. So we had talked about, if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself, pop in, and ask questions on the go. If you want to do it in the chat, also, I'll be moderating the chat, but we're small enough that Sarah felt comfortable. This can be a speak up as you have the question. So without further ado, Sarah Jones is the UEA Director of Educational Excellence and Government Relations. I had to read the title because it's long and awesome. But Sarah has been really instrumental in helping UASP get involved with UEA more thoroughly and really giving us some of the knowledge and grounds with which to make the progress we have had in the last couple of years. She's been so helpful, so amazing. We love her very much. So we're really happy that she's willing to give you guys this training today, because it's something that I had got from her when I was a UEA policy ambassador, and some of our other members have gotten. So I really hope that it's helpful to everybody today. And I will turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I wish we could be in person. I wish everything could be back in person. And so what I said to Lauren was, let's make this as interactive as possible on a Zoom room with 20 people. So please, as I go through my slides and talk about different points, don't hesitate to wait to either put in the chat or just, chime in, unmute and chime in and ask a question when it's timely versus waiting till the end. I'd like to make this as interactive as it's possible to be in this format. So let me first of all say thank you to each of you. 3 incredibly difficult school years. I'm trying to think of the time frame when COVID started, and now it's surging again. And I'm sure it's very stressful to be in school, and students are very stressed and worried. So thank you for what you do to support our students and our educators every day. And congratulations on this interest in building your organizational power and your personal power as an educator, and helping policymakers really understand the work that school psychologists do and the critical role you play in our schools, and why it's important to fund that, to support that through policy in all these different ways. So as Lauren said, I'm at UEA, and I've been at UEA for 12 years. I started my career as a high school teacher. I'm from California, and I taught in the Bay Area. I taught economics and US history. And then I went to graduate school and got my doctorate and taught at the university level for a number of years before coming to UEA and working on professional programs for educators, as well as leading our legislative team. And so I am up at the Hill every day during the legislative session. Well, except for last year, which was weird to lobby from home. But I hope that you know that whether or not you're able to come to the Hill in person this year, you can still make a difference by contacting your legislators, getting involved in the conversation. That's how our professional staff did it last year for UEA, was virtually, and it definitely can make a difference. So what I have planned is to share a slideshow and then share some information about the legislative website, so you can navigate that and track what's happening on the website. But again, since I will be showing the slideshow and I can't necessarily see each of your boxes on the screen, Lauren's going to help me know when I should stop and have some questions. So can I share my screen, Bethany? Let's see. Yes.
You should be able to, yes.
Okay. And fingers crossed that technology will cooperate today.
It's looking beautiful.
So far, so good. Okay, are you seeing my slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So where I want to start is looking at some information about the Utah legislature. Now, for some of you, if you've lobbied before, if you've engaged before in the legislature, I hope this is not too remedial, but I wanted to ground everybody in how our legislative body works, so that you can start to see kind of how you can get involved. Utah has one of the shortest legislative sessions in the country. It's just 45 days. And in that 45 days, they have to balance the budget. That is a constitutional requirement. And they pass policy issues during that 45 days. So this year, it starts on January 18th. And those 45 days include weekends, by the way. So it's consecutive. So this really is just a little over 6 weeks of very intensive policy making. And I highlight that because When things are moving quickly, there may not always be time for very robust discussion about policy implications. And you have a part-time legislature that is made up of individuals who the rest of the year, the other 300 plus days of the year, are back home working as a pharmacist or as a business owner or as a farmer or whatever their capacity is, and they are part-time legislators, and they really need to hear from experts in the field how policy is impacting the field. So it's a very, very brisk, fast-paced session. Now, if you aren't able to really engage in person during the legislative session that ends on March 4th, throughout the year, the legislature meets in what are called interim meetings. These are monthly meetings that are scheduled from May to November. They are both budget meetings and policy meetings, or what are called appropriations committees and standing committees. And that allows them to convene if they need to pass some kind of bill or budgetary adjustment. But it also gives them a chance to meet throughout the year to think about policy for the upcoming legislative session. It's a bicameral legislature. There are 75 members in the House of Representatives, and those members serve a 2-year term. It is a supermajority in both the House and in the Senate of Republicans. There's a Speaker of the House that's elected by the majority party in the House, and that's who leads the leadership team in the House. Senator,
we're only seeing your title slide so far. So if they're moving on your screen, they're not moving on ours. Before you keep going, and we're not reading along too far.
So are you on the UASP legislative training?
Uh-huh.
And you haven't seen the Utah legislature?
I can see them on the side. Like right now, the screen share is like of your whole presentation of like, but the, you know, I could see your side ones, and then the main one was just the title one.
Okay, hold on. We're going to try to fix the technology. I'm going to mute for a second.
You're fine.
And Sarah, it wouldn't be a perfect training if we didn't have a little technical snafu, right?
So I'm just going to go get our IT guy because I have 2 screens, and maybe that's the issue with the screen sharing. So hold on 1 minute. I'll be right back.
You're good.
While we wait for Sarah and IT, I did put this in the chat, but just to preemptively let people know, we are recording this, as I'm sure you're aware. We will upload it, and if any of your colleagues are wanting to observe this or view it, because this was a free training, we are going to then restate and let everyone know that this can be viewed at a follow-up date in our member resources area.
I don't have any fun interim content. I would get started on the other things, but they don't really make sense to do until after. So we'll just sit here.
Staring at your face.
Kirsten says staring at your face.
Too bad I don't have any music to play. Some good.
You could tell us how Forrest is doing.
Well, I thought you were going to say a joke. I was like, I don't know any jokes,
No, I don't know
Bethany.
any jokes. I didn't expect anybody else to have jokes.
Kevin might know a joke.
I got jokes.
Tell us a joke, Kevin.
Well, I came into my office today and I noticed the clock was missing from my wall, so I have no idea where the time went.
Do you have any school psychology related jokes? Does anybody have any of those?
Not necessarily a school psychology related joke, but I had something in my mailbox at school today that said my name and then social studies teacher. And I then told my administrators that they need to figure out which social studies teacher and I are switching jobs.
That's
None
probably
of-
quite the shock for the social studies teacher.
None of the teachers seem to want to switch jobs. I don't know why.
Dang. That's funny. Sort of
Yesterday,
close.
I got the offer to change to be an SLP, and I questioned if that would be a good choice in life or not. But they appealed it of you could be the SLP going and servicing students in a special program that have heavy behavior needs, and that was definitely appealing. So I told them that's like SLP in disguise. That's really just school psychology. One other thing we might want to do when Sarah gets back, Lauren, is maybe she could send the presentation over to you, see if that would be of assistance.
That is true. Sarah, if you can hear us, one other option is you could send it to me and I can screen share it for you.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. I just got our IT person, so we're going to get it squared away.
Thanks, IT. Hey, it changed. That moved.
I'll just be right away.
Oh my goodness, did this work?
Yeah.
Okay, trying to juggle multiple screens. I think that was my problem.
Yeah,
Sorry, let me just go close my office door now.
I'm good.
Okay, try to get back in the zone now.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that was totally me. Okay, so I was talking about the length of the legislative session and why it's important for you to get engaged in policy discussions because it's a part-time legislature. Most of them are not education professionals, let alone having the specialization of school psychologists. Policy discussions are made very quickly. And so they really need to hear from professionals of the legislature. Please tell me that slide advanced.
Yes, it did.
All right. Okay, so this is what I was saying, I think, when you let me know that things were not working as well. The House of Representatives, 2-year terms, 75 members. The Senate, 29 members, and they have a 4-year term. Both are supermajority Republican-led bodies, led by the Speaker of the House in the Senate and the House and the President of the Senate in the Senate. So I put a number up there, 38, 15, and 1. Any thoughts about why that number is, those numbers are significant? And you can just unmute and shout it out if you have a thought. No guesses? That is the number, those are the numbers that it takes to pass a piece of legislation. And so we do at UEA count votes to know if we want to, you need to get it over the line by getting more votes in the House or in the Senate, or stop it from going forward. So you need 38 votes in the House, 15 votes in the Senate, and the governor to sign a bill for a bill to become a law. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about is how the process works, because understanding how a bill moves through the legislative process will help you know where you should interact with the legislator and when you should get involved, by understanding kind of how you can be most effective in the process of lobbying. You need to know where a bill is, and then that's who you talk with: a senator if it's on the Senate side, a representative if it's on the House side. But let's talk a little about that process. So this is just kind of a very broad graphic representation of how a bill moves through the process of becoming a law. And you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen in blue, it's representing what happens in the House. And on the right-hand side of the screen in green, it's representing what happens in the Senate. And they really mirror each other. But the first stop for a bill is to be introduced into the body as a whole, into the House or the Senate, and then assigned to a standing committee. So UEA tracks a lot of different standing committees. Of course, we track the House Education Committee and the Senate Education Committee, but we also follow bills in other committees as well, because other policy issues will affect educators. For example, we track the Retirement Committee, because Utah educators are part of the Utah retirement system. We track the Revenue and Taxation Committee, because anything having to do with tax policy, increasing taxes, well, that never happens, but decreasing taxes affects funding. We track government operations, because a lot of election-related bills come through government operations, and elections affect who is making education decisions at the state board or at the legislature or at the federal level even. So it goes from a standing committee, goes to a standing committee for a vote. And then if it passes out of committee, it goes to the full House or the full Senate for a vote. And then it has to switch sides and go to the other chamber for the exact same process: a committee hearing, a floor vote, and ultimately being passed. If at some point a bill that originated in the House becomes changed or amended in the Senate, it's going to have to go back to the House to concur or to agree with the changes the Senate made. So there could be some back and forth. And then the final step is that it has to be signed by the governor. So as you think about this, if there's a bill that you're tracking this legislative session that you're interested in, and it's a bill that is being sponsored by a senator, your first chance to lobby is with that bill sponsor on the Senate side, in a Senate committee, and then on the floor of the Senate. Don't start with the House side, because the bill may or may not ever make it out of the Senate, right? And then if it's already passed out of the Senate and is now being considered by the House, if you then go back and lobby the Senate, right, you're too late. You need to be focusing on the House side. So understanding where the bill is helps you know when and where to lobby. So I thought we could track one bill through the process, just to get a sense of how the information that you'll find on the legislative website, how to view that and understand that that process. So let me see if I can stop sharing and start sharing something else. Hold on one moment. Oh. Nope, we jumped ahead. Okay, so are you no longer seeing my slideshow? Okay. Hold on one minute.
Yes, now we're not seeing any screen sharing. now we're seeing the Utah Legislator website.
Okay, good. That's what you're supposed to be seeing. Hold on again 1 minute. I'm sorry, I'm seeing something different here. So we're going to take another quick pause for a little break. Okay, so what I wanted to show you was a little bit about the legislative website and how you find information on the legislative website. So we're le.utah.gov. It's your one-stop shop for everything legislature related. You'll notice down here there's a calendar so you can see upcoming events. But what I want to talk about is how you find information on a bill. So at the top here, this ribbon, you'll see bills are listed. And you can go down to view bills to search for bills during the 2022 session. And there's two ways that you can search for a bill. You can look at the bill requests if you know the bill sponsor. So there you could search by the sponsor's name, Representative Elison. Or here you can also search by subject area. So you could look for education. You can also just look numerically. And if I go to 2022 general session, it will just show all the bills in numerical order. So to give you a sense of how you read the bill, let me show you a bill from last session. So Senate Bill 107 was one that you probably heard about because it got a lot of press about requiring schools allow for in-person instruction. This was when the Salt Lake City School District was the only district in the state that was not back in school in 2021. And the legislature was going to try to force their hand on that. So this bill went through numerous iterations. It actually went through 7 different versions before it was finally passed. So you'll see at the top here, bill text shows you all the language in the bill. Then you can see status, shows you where the bill is in the process. So this is where you'll know if it's been assigned to a Senate committee, if it's passed out of the Senate, if it's over in the House. So by the date, it will tell you where it is in the process. And then hearings and debate. If you're listening after the fact, most meetings you're not going to be able to attend because It's during the school day when they're holding a committee meeting or when they're having a floor debate, but you can always listen after the fact and go back and listen to the audio for the committee hearing or the floor debate under hearings and debates. The other information to know is that the bill sponsor is the person controlling the bill. So they always have a sponsor in the opposite chamber, but that person is not really controlling the bill. It's the originating sponsor, the bill sponsor, who is the person to lobby more so than the floor sponsor who's just running the bill in the opposite chamber. You'll also see on this page with bill text all the previous versions of the bill. So as it moves through the process and it's changed and it's amended, and then you'll see that there are committee amendments, that there's a fiscal note, which means a budgetary cost, and then it also gives you information about where it is at the moment and kind of, again, where it's moving through the process. As you're reading the bill itself, a couple of helpful tips. So this highlighted provision gives you a quick summary of what a bill is accomplishing. And so if you can't read a 30-page bill, but you're trying to understand if it's perhaps relevant to you or to your profession, the highlighted provisions will give you that little summary of it, and then you can decide whether to read more deeply in the bill. The other thing to keep in mind is that anything that's underlined, like the language is here, is brand new language and code. It's what they are proposing to add to existing state code. If there was a strike through, that would mean they're proposing to delete language from the code. And the final thing on a bill to understand is a key word. So here on line 109, it says an LEA shall. Legislative language will use shall or may. May is permissive. So a school district may do something. They can choose. Shall is a requirement. And there can be a lot of debate about those two words in a piece of legislation, whether the legislature is going to mandate something or encourage something or allow something with the may. So this is where you want to go for information about tracking a bill, reading a bill, kind of understanding what's happening. Again, I think this status bar, incredibly helpful. And then the hearings and debate as well, if you want to go back and listen after the fact to what the senators were debating, what the issues were, the arguments that were being made, the public comment that was being made, all of that would be captured in that audio. Okay, I'm going to switch back to another screen. So hold on a moment again.
We're back to your presentation.
That window over to this screen.
Okay, I'll come get you. Okay, can you see lobbying 101?
Yes.
Oh my word, can I tell you, having multiple screens is good in some ways, and in others I'm sorry. I'm just not with it on this multiple screen thing.
All good.
Well, you guys are very patient and I appreciate it. So as you think about lobbying, and if it's okay, I'm going to keep my mask on just because there's multiple people in here. If you have a problem hearing me, please let me know. Okay.
Sounds good.
Last year during COVID in October of 2020, UEA conducted a survey of members. We had over 3,000 members respond to the survey. And we asked them a bunch of questions. It was a very comprehensive survey about many, many issues. But one of the questions that we asked was, below is a list of problems that some school employees are concerned about in Utah. And then it gave them a list of all these different issues that they could identify, right? So it was class size, salary of educators, behavior issues. I mean, there were 20 different things that they could choose from. The number one response by more than 80% of respondents calling it a very serious problem was politicians and non-educators making school and classroom decisions, which actually surprised me. This was rated as a more serious problem than salary, as a more serious problem than class size, as a more serious problem than everything else in the option. It was this idea that somebody who doesn't understand my profession, who doesn't understand the needs of my profession, is making a decision about my profession without my input. So as you think about starting to have conversations or building on the relationships you already have with policymakers, and I'm going to use policymakers very broadly. This could be your local school board. It could be the State Board of Education. This could be the legislature. All of those bodies create policy that affects educators. Think about how you build this relationship over time. So first of all, lobbying is not something that you're going to be most effective at the very first time you reach out and contact your senator or your representative. It really is about repeated interactions over time. So rarely do you have the most influence with legislators in that first interaction, although sometimes you may. I have seen people tell a particularly compelling story at just the right moment, and it's really stuck with legislators. But use your expertise and your credentials to your advantage as you start building these relationships. For example, I introduce myself as Dr. Jones when I give testimony in a legislative committee, as a way of highlighting my professional expertise and experience. And don't hesitate to do that yourself. You know, when you're talking with somebody and saying, you know, I have 10 years of experience as a school psychologist, here is what my background is, to help them understand the context of your expertise. And it's over time that your reputation will grow as a credible, reliable, knowledgeable, and honest broker of information. So I don't want you to feel frustrated that maybe you don't get the response you want in your very first interaction, but keep at it and build that relationship over time. Reach out to policymakers with a phone call, with an email. So few people engage in the process that really just a little bit of engagement can make a difference, can make you stand out. I have had legislators tell me that really just a few letters, a few emails, a few phone calls on an issue made it stand out for them because they really don't get a lot of public engagement on issues. And on the legislative website, we didn't have time to go over this, but on this le.utah.gov is all the contact information for legislators, certainly their legislative email address, but also their cell phone number. Most of them have their cell phone number up there, and that's the easiest way to get in touch with them is a text or a phone call. As you are starting to have conversations about a particular issue, try to understand what the policymaker wants to do. It is more likely than not coming from a good intent of wanting to help solve a problem or help provide support for students. And if their idea is not going to be the most successful because you know in your experience something else works better, or there's a potential conflict or roadblock, help them understand what it is they want to accomplish. And then this helps you to provide input on whether the policy proposal actually is going to help them accomplish the goal, or maybe there's a more effective approach to doing that. Now, sometimes it can get frustrating if somebody is proposing legislation that you just think is not going to be helpful, is even going to be harmful. Don't get into arguments. If the policymaker isn't receptive or happens to be argumentative, sometimes you just have to take a step back and say, well, we're going to agree to disagree. But then look to find the common ground so you can keep building the relationship over time. And by that, I mean, it's something like, I think we can agree that the most important thing we are both concerned with is that we focus on what's best for students. And I appreciate that you really want to do what's best for students. I'd like to continue to talk with you on this bill as you're working to really do what's best for students and help you understand what I know from my school. Something like that. It's the agree to disagree, but looking to find those common values that you share so that you can build the relationship going forward. So one thing that I do see a lot as educators come up to the Hill for the very first time is using the jargon that nobody outside education understands. We have our own lingo, all the acronyms and abbreviations, right? If you start talking about SPED or SEL or RTI or whatever it might be, you're gonna see the glazed over look. You're gonna lose the impact of your message if they don't understand the educational lingo that you're using. And it's so easy to fall into that because that's just how we talk all day long. But just be aware of that. Now, there are some legislators who are current or former educators and would pick up on that easily, but most are not. So unless you're talking to someone who is an educator, don't speak in code. Help them understand exactly what it is you're trying to explain. I work with special needs students, and we've discovered that social emotional learning has really been effective because that kind of thing. Now, before you meet with the policymaker, I really encourage you to think about what you want to say, what the message is that you want to share, and even practice or kind of bullet out the points that you want to make. Remember to introduce yourself. Remember to share your professional background, so you're grounding yourself in your expertise. And remember to let them know that you are a constituent and a voter, right? They represent you as a legislator. You are their constituent and you turn out to vote. And you are looking forward to building a very productive relationship with them as one of their constituents who can really help to advise them on education issues. And then after the meeting, follow up with a thank you email or thank you text to continue to build that relationship over time. We have said to our educators who come to the Hill that the easiest way to connect with a policymaker is to tell a story. The story is going to take this abstract idea about curriculum or about social and emotional needs, whatever the policy issue might be, and bring this abstract policy idea into this clearer focus. So stories can paint a picture of student needs. Stories can illustrate the impact of policy choices on students. And legislators are much more likely to remember a personalized story than having a simple policy discussion. So a couple of years ago, I was sitting in a budget meeting. It was the last budget meeting of the session, and they were getting ready to finalize the education budget. And two different legislators spoke about teachers they talked to that session who'd shared stories about student mental health needs and the impact that had on them, to hear about young students with these real mental health needs and describing what that was like in the classroom and describing what the struggle was for the families. And they brought that conversation back to a budget meeting as they were planning to prioritize some funding for student mental health. But they remembered those stories and it made an impact. And also remember to include an ask, or in other words, a solution at the end of your story. Policymakers don't just want to hear a litany of problems. They want to know what they can do to make it better. And so remember to include an ask or a solution at the end of the story. One of my very first years up at the Capitol, I was meeting with then Senator Henderson. She's now the Lieutenant Governor, but she was the chair of the Senate Education Committee. And I sat down with her and I had my whole plan of like, I'm going to lead up to what we want. And she cut me off and she's like, what do you want, Sarah? Like, just what is it you want? Because they have limited time. They want to know solutions, not just problems. And so make sure you have a clear ask in there and know that maybe your time is going to be pretty limited. And then finally, remember that you are the education expert. Most legislators are not full-time educators. And even if they are full-time educators, and there are a few, they're not in your school. They haven't had the exact same experience you have. So they're not in a school daily. They're not in your community daily. You know how the policies are impacting your students, and own that. This is not being a legislator or not having vast policy experience is not a weakness. That is not a deficiency. It's your strength. You have practical, on the ground, real world experience about what's happening with students right now, what the needs are for your profession. And I see a lot of educators feel intimidated in these conversations because, well, I'm not a policy expert. That's okay. You don't need to be the policy expert. You are bringing what the real world needs are to the conversation to help inform policy discussions.
I think, Sarah, also, I just want to chime in, amen to all of that. And also I think for school psychologists, we've talked about this a lot in like within our things and associations, that we are, as a profession, in a generalization, are very bad at tooting our own horns. And I think that as school psychologists, sometimes we're like, it feels weird, like intrinsically wrong. And I would say, leave that feeling at the door. Like, you need to come in with a strong story. Like, don't feel like you're being over dramatic. Like, those stories mean something to people, even though it's your daily living experience. So like, just set that aside and come in with a really good story. Like, and with selling how awesome your impact was when you tell that story. So yeah.
Perfect. So let's get into that a little bit, because I want to give you time actually in this space to think about a story that you can use in conversations this session. So just as Lauren said, I mean, this is what you can bring to the table in a really impactful way. And yes, providing data may be an important follow-up, providing facts, all those kinds of things, that's important in creating policy. But if you're really trying to illustrate a need, this is what people will remember. This is what can be very impactful. And again, as you are building a relationship over time, you're trying to get in the door, you're trying to get acquainted with your legislators. And so as the conversation maybe moves deeper, that's when you move beyond a story to some of the things that really create context around that. But a story is a great way to start that. So just take a minute and think about what's happening currently in education in Utah, in your school, issues about your profession, maybe in particular, some things that are happening with students you've been working with this year. Just kind of brainstorm for a second as I'm talking, because we're going to give you some time to practice this in a minute. But identify the issue, and then from the issue, how can you kind of expand that out by thinking of a story, an experience that illustrates that issue. And, excuse me. And how can you connect then kind of the broad issue and a story that's going to illustrate it to the idea of a solution or policy, or the need for more funding, or the need to have legislation that would benefit, or don't go that route with legislation because that's not going to help at all. That's going to be the opposite. We kind of start brainstorming that. And as you think about your ask, think about making that ask specific, tangible, and verifiable. So the more general you are, and the less specific you are, then that doesn't really give them actionable ideas to work on. So for example, I gave you a couple of examples up here. Yeah, we tell our legislators, hey, support education. And every single one of them says they support education, right? So are they supporting education in the way that you need right now? If so, we wouldn't be up at the Capitol lobbying, right? There's still some needs. So support education, we want to get them to think more specifically about that. So the idea of saying, please vote to support House Bill 123 in committee today. That is a very specific ask. Or less effective, saying, hey, we need more resources in education. Well, okay, sure. What you really want them to do is think about where they are placing those resources and how much they are, they're devoting to certain policy issues. So please support this early literacy funding bill. It's going to be in the House for debate tomorrow. Please vote yes in support of that. And that's, again, knowing where a bill is in the process helps you to be able to make those kind of specific asks. Or increase education funding, right? Support UEA's ask of 5% on the WPU this year. Support UASP's ask of right? Give them some specific, tangible, and verifiable asks. Okay, so I want us to take a minute to be able to think about this, to practice this. Maybe to share some ideas, just to kick around some ideas. But there's basically 4 things to think through. There's a need or an issue that you're aware of in your school or in your profession, because it could be issues around, we need more school psychologists, we need more scholarships at the university level. So I want you to think both about your school or about the profession. A solution, so what do we do about that? The ask, putting it in a very concrete way, and then a story to illustrate. And always, always the most impactful way to talk about it is in a student-centered way. That's what we all care about. That's why we're in this profession. That's what legislators care about. And even if your need and your story deals with something like salary, the important way to think about that is, I am an important piece of the school community. I am doing this, this, and this to support children. And without a higher salary, we are not going to be able to recruit enough school psychologists into the profession. We are not going to be able to retain enough school psychologists, and we make a difference for kids, right? So even when you're talking about something that's maybe adult focused, the salary of the professionals in the building, it's important to make it student centered so that legislators are seeing that connection between what you do and the students you serve. And then keep your story brief. You may get 1 or 2 minutes with a legislator. So you've got to have this elevator pitch, right, that you can really get to. So Lauren was going to talk a little bit about an example of what she's shared before.
I have a couple. So when you asked me to think about this, Sarah, I was like, well, it's kind of evolved as my position has evolved, because I've never wanted to represent like that I'm still a school psychologist in a building when I haven't been. So it's kind of changed. So I'll give you guys a couple examples. When I was still in a building as a school psychologist, one of my go-to stories would be typically something along the lines of this. Like, I'm a school psychologist who works in 2 Title I schools. I am blessed enough to be able to split my time between just 2 schools, which gives me the time to do things like meet daily with students who have high anxiety and who wouldn't be coming to school otherwise. And it also gives me the opportunity to respond quickly to suicide ideation that my students have. And let me tell you about this one time that I had a student who came to school who had mentioned to a peer that they, were thinking about suicide or about cutting themselves later that day. Because that student was able to come tell their teacher, I was able to talk to that student within 30 minutes of them saying that to that student. And because of that, I was able to meet with their parent and get them appropriate treatment and get them to the place that was safest right away, versus not getting to it for days, or an appropriate mental health professional not handling it correctly. So the ability of me to be there on site and have relationships with students and be able to split my time, I like to think saved a student's life that day. And yes, that's very dramatic, but again, like I said, you have to make it tangible for people. So when you vote for bills or when you help support ways that can bring more school psychologists to the state of Utah, you are giving students better access to prevent suicide. That was one. Very dramatic. I felt like the first times I said it, but it makes sense to people. I think most legislators don't understand the concept of ratios and us being in buildings more often than not. When I was at an administrative level, one that I would usually talk about was every year I get calls from principals daily saying, what school psychologist are you going to give me next year? And can I have them full time? Could I have them 3.5 days a week versus 2? What do I need to do for you to give me a school psychologist? And as an administrator, I'd say, well, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to give you, as much school psychology time as I can. And on the flip side of things, I would be scrambling to hire, and it's a competition between my other fantastic colleagues in school districts. And at the end of the day, I really know that it's going to impact the students wherever the school psychologists end up. When the principals are calling me, asking me for a school psychologist, is because they know that directly impacts their students that desperately need mental health services, and really lifts a weight off of their teachers, because teachers don't have time or expertise to help those students in the classroom. And then my ask about please support, this, and this. Those are 2 examples of ones. Bethany has a really good one that she pulls out. I've heard her pull out a couple times about a student only coming when she's present in the building. And I think that usually rings really true with people. I'm trying to think of my other kind of go-to ones, but those are examples of the ones that I would use a lot. One that I use now a lot is talking about, we have we have new data this year that shows that 42 school districts in Utah have 0 access to a school psychologist. That means there are thousands of students in the state of Utah, probably in our more rural areas, that don't have access to, mental health provision that a school psychologist can offer. That is something that we need to ameliorate immediately. So my ask is, we funnel support and money into grow your own programs that can keep people who live in those rural areas and get them trained to be that school psychologist for those students.
Those are all great. And you notice this as Lauren was describing these, and not, actually saying the conversation, but they were all short. They were student-centered. They were about supporting the profession as well. So I'm going to try to stop sharing screen, come back together as a grid, and really just start, popping out these ideas of what message do you want to share and how can you kind of build a story around that. So Lauren, you could even start maybe facilitating that conversation while I'm trying to get my computer to stop sharing.
Yeah, so I think that, the stories that I just said, I think were very appropriate for things that you could focus on this coming year and into the future, right? The biggest thing that I think we are trying to communicate is our value and why we need to be there more often, because that really, facilitates the why support and staffing for these things. I think mental health is such a apparent topic right now that I think anytime you can speak to the impact you're having on students, that will be emotionally triggering for lawmakers and why you're important there. I think the other biggest thing is then it demonstrates to them what you do, because sometimes they're like, well, they're a counselor, so I don't know what they do. So talking specifically about working with the student on anxiety or helping a student to reduce a behavior so the teacher wasn't having to do it are great. So Bethany, why don't you, since I threw you under the bus, why don't you give your example while everybody's kind of thinking about like what kind of grand story they can come up with. And you can make yourself sound better than you think you are. It's okay. No one will do research and find out.
Can you tell me if you're seeing the whole Zoom call now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are. We're seeing everybody in the grade. You did great, Sarah. And Lauren, you never throw me under the bus. Yeah, I oftentimes use that story when I'm talking to, whether it's legislators or fellow educators. I've used it frequently with like school board members and even when talking to my superintendent. And I will pause and just mention at NASP in Baltimore, they had us do the elevator pitch, and literally our assignment, the homework was when you're going back to your hotel room and you're in the elevator, if you're alone, say it out loud. If you're not alone, don't be talking to your neighbors and giving them this pitch because everybody else is a school psych there, but say it in your head to get a feel for like that rapid nature. So that was really helpful. So my spiel really comes down to, I had a kindergartner that I was working with. I similarly, to what Lauren mentioned, had the privilege of being at 2 schools. And I always like to say how grateful I am that I do have a pretty good ratio, but even pretty good is not good enough when it comes to students. For this little guy, he had school anxiety or school fear of staying at school and would often run or just not come to the building. I'm a data geek and I would track it, but what I loved is that both my principal and the parent reached out to me and noticed, hey, little guy only comes to school either with a happy face, a high five, drawings that come home happy, staying the whole day on days Mrs. B is there. And so they would reach out and say, he's here, he's happy. What can we do to get you here every day? So they mentioned that. I had the joy and luxury of changing my schedule a little. He was kinder and I was able to be there in the mornings each day for him. That's not a luxury that many of our school psychs in rural areas or even districts that are understaffed have. So I usually talk about that and it appeals to the heart. The other piece that I do like to do when I talk to professionals, and I have this privilege, many of you may not, but I use it to educate the difference between a school psychologist and a school counselor. I love our social workers, but I don't very often get confused with a social worker. I get confused with a counselor. What I use in my experience is I actually did the schooling to do the school counselor program and attain that licensure as well as the school psychologist. So I tend to use that a little bit as a tongue in cheek when I'm talking to them of like, hey, they sometimes call me this, I had that licensure, but let me tell you how it's actually different in our roles. So I use that with my experience. That might be something, however you maybe want to infuse of educating that difference in the roles of maybe talking about that dear colleague that you collaborate with and how you guys differentiate yourselves.
Does anybody else from Legislative Committee have a story on hand that they have used or would like to give it a test run or a thought? We'll start with Legislative Committee before we get to anybody else.
So I'll just share, this is not a great story that I've been working on or anything like that, but just what comes to mind is today. So I work in a district where I serve 4 schools, which is a drastic improvement from when I used to serve 10 schools. So we have worked actively to improve the number of school psychs, and it really has made a difference. But still, even with 4 schools, I only get to see, a school roughly once a week. And so today I happened by one of my elementary schools. I had a little bit of extra time. A meeting ended early, so I went to a nearby school, and I happened to get there just a couple minutes before the special education team was going to meet with a parent about a student who had just come with autism, a little kindergarten guy with autism. He was transitioning from our district preschool, and his first day at school was really, really hard. He was all over the classroom. He was not following instructions. He was having a hard time not being distracting to his peers. And the team at the school had worked really hard to try and support that student, but it had a really tough day. And so they'd scheduled an appointment with the parents to kind of discuss what are we going to do. And I went there, and they asked if I could stay for the meeting. I had a couple minutes, so I could, and I just asked if I could look at his file and see some of the data that they'd had at the preschool. And as I looked at that, I realized that all the data that they had shown that he'd had a far heavier support. He had a greater support team, and that all the testing that they had done indicated that he needed very significant supports, and probably needed to have most of his education supports in probably a separate setting, or at least with someone with him in his class. And so they'd sent him to school. The parents had said, yeah, he should be fine. And he'd been in school with essentially no additional supports. And looking at that additional information, everyone else had access to the reports. Everyone else had seen his file, but no one had pulled together that this is a student who's in the bottom 1% of students his age. He needs a lot of support. And so we got to discuss that at that meeting, and ultimately come up with a plan that I think will set him on a better trajectory for success. But again, and I was glad that I could be there, and I was glad that I could provide that support, but the meeting was going to happen either way. And in all likelihood, I was not going to be there, and none of that would have ever even have been discussed. So I just think it's all the efforts that we can do to help support attracting and retaining school psychs. We've had school psychs in our district leave for other states because the pay in Utah in some cases is not as attractive as in other places. And so I think those efforts, every little thing that we do to support attracting and retaining school psychs really does make a difference for students, because we're able to be there more often and provide our expertise. So I don't know if you have any feedback on that story. I know it's not as good as your guys's, but
I think it's a good story. Don't sell yourself short. Does anybody else have any ideas or stories that they think might work for this context? Don't be shy. I'll start calling on people.
And two, Lauren, if they don't have a story yet, maybe even starting the discussion at what are the key needs you'd really want to talk to a legislator about this year, and kind of winnowing that down of the biggest thing I want to communicate to a legislator is, and then kind of reflecting then on a story about that. So if you don't have a story, what are the needs you think that really should be communicated this year?
I think most of you are in a very good position to speak to this as you're in schools. Like, I know what our US priorities are, but what are your priorities as an on-the-ground school psychologist this year?
I have a really rough story, and I'm just going to use this platform to practice that. I'm a graduate student, and I've been pretty involved with the CRT issue that's been happening in Utah. So this is what I would probably say. There's been a ban on CRT K through 12 in many states, and there's been a huge impact on how teachers feel like they can engage with their students. And there was a teacher who noticed one of her students might have felt microaggressed, but she didn't know how to approach the student because she was really afraid that she would lose her job. So she never talked to the student about it. And microaggressions affect students of color and their mental health. And there might be other students out there who could use the support but aren't getting it as well. So my ask is whether we can revisit this issue and how it's impacting our students of color. That's very like just brainstorm, but yeah, that's what I have.
I think that's a very, very timely issue, Mary. And just along the line of the term microaggression, depending who you're having the conversation with, it may or may not be a familiar term. So that might even require another sentence or two to kind of describe what the student is experiencing to help it be relatable.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I think one big concern that I've been having, especially with some things that happened in Utah in, I think like October, November-ish, surrounding like pride flags and safe zone posters and things like that. That was something that I was really passionate about and was really working on advocating for in my own school. But I'm new to Utah. And so sometimes I'm still working on navigating the some of the cultural differences from where I'm from, especially I think when it comes to things like that. And so I'm working on kind of a story with that, but nothing concrete.
And Shay, I think you brought up something that I didn't talk about, but that's a really good point about who your representative is. So depending on your particular party affiliation or ideology, if you are talking about a more progressive issue and your representative is a member of the Democratic Party and in the minority, they may connect very readily with you on the issue and not necessarily have as much influence, not being the majority party, but could still be an advocate on the issue. Or maybe your representative is somebody who has a belief on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And it's just even helping them to understand your concern from your perspective, depending on, I mean, I've heard from a lot of educators who are like, my legislator just always votes with us, with UEA on these education issues. It's great. How do I have a deeper conversation? And others that are saying, my legislator never votes in the way I want on these issues. So finding out who your legislator is, it can be a very different conversation.
I think, Sarah, and correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes with those conversations, I would tend to steer towards student impact directly. So to say, I'm concerned about how this is impacting the students that I serve every day. Here's an example. I have a student who identifies as LGBTQ, and they came to me to say like they feel very uncomfortable and unsafe and et cetera, because of some of these things that are happening in the school building. I think making it concrete is helpful because then it makes it about a real person and humanizes the experience and puts it back into, I'm the educator in the building and the expert, and here's what I'm seeing on the ground.
I'll add to this some of the leadership in UASP. We did some advocacy work at the federal level and reached out to our representatives. And thinking of our representatives from Utah, we've got some diversity there. And I freely admit, to be transparent to you guys, I was terrified when I was like, I have to call and talk to that person. I don't know, it gave me a lot of feels. That said, when I kind of calmed myself down and used those coping skills we all have, I did like Lauren mentioned, if we went back to the data, we went back to talking about students. And the piece that I I'm glad I went through that like scary moment, was frequently you're talking to staffers, and those staffers and or their representative you might feel have different opinions potentially. You're still talking to them and educating them, and they care. You might have different philosophies, you might have different votes if you were to vote, but in the end, it's still the conversation that needs to be had. So I would just go back to those student-based areas and ensure that they're hearing it. I guess I'm just saying, like, it's okay to be a little bit spooked by it and move past it and really just talk to them at that human level. Do you feel like that occurs, Sarah, that those conversations, you kind of get past the party lines, if you will?
I do, and I think that's brilliantly said, Bethany, about connect with them on the human level. That's that value-based conversation. So if there's a particular policy you're talking about, particular bill, let's say, transgender student athletes from the last couple of years that raised a lot of controversy and a lot of concern about how that would impact students in our high schools. Helping people that are making these decisions understand the real impact on students by personalizing it and by making it student-centered, and always bringing it back to students and connecting on that value level, and continuing the conversation that way.
Thank you for all of that input. I think I'm a lot better at when I'm sending emails through like the advocacy centers and stuff like that. I'm a lot better at writing it all down rather than the thought of discussing it in person with like legislators is a little more intimidating.
I think that's true for everybody. I think, like Bethany put in the chat earlier, she was, it's scary the first time you do it. Don't lie to people and tell people it's going to be like, a cakewalk, because I think it's just something you have to practice. I would say, like, the elevator thing, like practice it in the mirror, like come up with it, like, that's why we're doing it today, kind of formulating your thoughts on it. I do think written communication is certainly easier, and sometimes you can like write it out for yourself, as your own little script. Yeah, I think that's true for everyone, Shay.
And especially when it's something so close to the heart that you feel really passionately about, and maybe get emotional even talking about the experience of a student with suicidal ideation or with autism, as Sterling talked about, or whatever the issue might be. Those are very powerful stories, and so it can be really close to your heart. And you may, you want to be able to have a deep conversation about it with a legislator, and you probably won't get to have a deep conversation about it. But again, if you think about opening the door to building a relationship over time and having further conversations with them. And I do hear this a lot from educators that come to the Hill about, it's an intimidating space, right? Someone with authority as a legislator. But these are truly your neighbors, right? That's the person down the block. It's the person who owns a business, or, a doctor, or just regular folks. And you know so much more than they do about your profession and about your students, and just owning that power.
Rovi, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rovi. I'm a psych over at Davis, and I just have a question. So like when we're thinking about stories to present, it sounds like we can provide stories about any issue that we see fit. And I'm just curious if they're usually already like predetermined like issues or themes that we would speak for or against, or do we just come with a variety of stories and see what the legislators would like to explore more after that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you broke up a little bit, but let me synthesize and see if it was what your question was basically, should we come with just a variety of stories ready to go, or is there something we should become prepared for a story to say, like, on this topic, support this, and I have this story related? Was that the question?
Sorry, I don't know what had happened there. My app also froze. Kind of. So I think what I'm trying to ask is there like, are there already like preset issues that we would come to prepare to comment on, or do we come and okay.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, when Sarah's saying like come prepared with a specific ask, that's definitely part of it. Like the examples we just gave were nebulous. I didn't have that specific part because I don't have a specific bill. But yes, so like our US priorities are ones that this year you can go up and say, please vote for this bill that will provide NCSP licenses, like stipends to people who have the NCSP licensure. So for that one, you'd want a story that would be related to like retention, right? Like if I had an NCSP licensure, like I would feel validated, and that would help students because, or like, so my thing for NCSP licensure, my little blurb of a story is from the administrative level, right? Like I'm trying to hire school psychologists to come to Utah to do amazing work with students, so that way they can be in the buildings. However, it's hard for me to attract school psychologists because all of my neighboring states pay more, and they have incentives like the national licensure stipend. There's precedent for doing that because our teachers get a national licensure stipend. So our school psychologists are always really surprised when they don't get it. But really it just helps to attract good school psychologists to stay and work with our students in Utah. Therefore, please vote yes on the bill to, you know, provide stipends. If that answers your question, Roby? So UEA, you know, like when you go to Day on the Hill, part of that is in the morning, Sarah and her team brief you on what's happening. Like they tell you what are the bills that are important for you to know about, and what can you ask your legislator to do today. So that's one of the most amazing parts of Day on the Hill, is that you have like a guiding hand to tell you, like, talk to them about this. And I think from the school psychology perspective, you could always bring it back to, you know, a story about why you're important and why funding for mental health is important in schools. Those are like always the wins, I think.
And Rovi, you bring up a really good point too about a story that's specific to a bill maybe that you're advocating for, versus kind of something more broad about funding for school psychologists to have a lower ratio, this kind of thing. And that may evolve as the legislative session goes on. Right now, there are not a lot of bills that are public that you can even read and know what's being proposed, but that will start rolling fast once the session is underway. And you may see a particular bill you are advocating for or against. Funding is always an issue, and creating context around why funding should be increased. And also, as a resource for all of you, please check out myuea.org, and we have a page called Under the Dome, and it's your one-stop shop for all things legislative. We have daily updates. We have a weekly briefing that you can join via Zoom. I promise you it works more smoothly than I did today, but it's a weekly legislative briefing on Thursdays, so you can hear what's happening at the Capitol. We have videos on there, again, about how to really navigate the legislative system, all sorts of resources, including a tracking sheet, which lists all of the education bills we're following and our positions on them. So that can also give you some direction or focus, in addition to the UASP priorities as well, of what you want to have a conversation about as you find a story to illustrate.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
So Lauren, since we're getting close to 2:30 and I know you have some other things you want to cover in this, maybe I'll just have a couple of concluding thoughts and then, but before I get there, I know that some of your members are coming to our Thursday evening Educator Day on the Hill Plus.
Mhm.
And some are also coming to the Hill Day. Is there anything that I can share? I'm not sure if those people are in this room or not.
Some of them are, yes. And that is one thing that I was going to talk about at the end, just that more more detailed information would be coming, but whatever you want to share today about that, I think is great. And maybe sharing with the group about, I wanted to make sure everybody knew if you're not coming in person to that day on the Hill or to Thursday, there are other ways for you to be involved. And we had talked about that a little bit earlier. So yes, Sarah, I think those are great things for you to share.
Okay. So for those that, whether you're coming this year or in a future year, we do legislative training on Thursday evenings here at the UEA building. Just a little bit about what I covered today, very briefly, but in more depth about the legislative process, how you can track a bill, really understand where things are in the process. We spend quite a bit of time developing stories to be able to take to the Hill the next day, practicing those kind of conversations, networking. We do that for 2 hours on a Thursday evening. It's a lot of fun. Just if you're thinking about being COVID safe at the Hill this year, we are capping attendance at our Hill Day. We've never done that before. We've just crammed people in a room. The more the merrier. We are capping attendance. So there's a pre-registration this year so that we can socially distance. Masks are required. We do provide lunch. This year, we're not going to eat together so that we don't have to take off our masks, but we'll give you a stipend to pick up some food on the way home. It's a really energizing and fun day, and I think a very empowering day for educators to be able to be up there shaping the process that impacts you so much in your schools. So Lauren or Bethany can give you more information about that. And again, I'll just direct you to myuea.org/underthedome. Everything you need to know is there. Tons and tons of resources, and you can follow that throughout the session. And then I'd also invite you to belong to UEA. If you are not currently a UEA member, there's power in our numbers. We're more than 18,000 strong across the state. You can join online when you go to myuea.org. There's a big red button that says join now, so it's super easy. But there really is just a lot of power in us joining together as organizations to come to the Hill. So I look forward to seeing some of you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Sarah. And I don't know if you want to hang on while we do the rest of our half an hour, but you certainly can, or you can certainly leave. But
is there anything that I would be helpful with in that half hour? Or if not,
you know what, we're going to talk about our US priorities. So maybe if you hang on while we talk about that, that would be helpful as we kind of chit chat about that. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. And I appreciate your patience and your grace as I struggled with technology today. That was embarrassing. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I will echo Sarah, honestly, one of the things that we're going to talk about is how legislative committee can communicate with you. But I will be very honest, UEA Under the Dome is where I get my information. So if you guys are following UEA Under the Dome, you are in the same informational loop that like we are all in as well. So I would really recommend, like, if you are, really interested in understanding things, like taking a second to peruse their website, which they updated and it's beautiful. So I would say that's a great resource, even if you're not a UEA member, that's, you can use it. So I'm going to switch our order of things and we can talk about a communication plan in a second. And first I want to talk about our priorities while we still have Sarah here to kind of lend us her expertise and brain. So our priorities for UAS this year are similar to ones we've had in the past couple of years. But we actually have some things happening this year, which is fantastic. I really liked earlier when Sarah mentioned that, a couple calls or a couple emails can make it or break it, because I say, like every year during school psychology week, I always say, like, please do this email, like your voice counts, and it really does. So that like totally reinforced me. Thank you, Sarah. I know that was not your intent, but it did. So our focus this year is to attract and retain qualified school psychologists in Utah. So, you know, when Roby's asking, what is it that like is my goal? That's your goal. We want to attract and retain school psychologists. Importantly, because it's good for students and teachers, right? Like that's the part that needs to be important. We want school psychologists in Utah because it's good for students and teachers. Not because I'm a school psychologist and I just want more of myself, right? You're trying to remind people that it's because it's good for students and for teachers. The things that we're really focusing on this year are providing the nationally licensed school psychologist stipend. So we'd like that to be commensurate with the teacher national license stipend, or at the very minimum cover the cost of licensure fees. We're not sure what that's going to look like quite yet, but you can kind of anticipate these are the things that are going to be up for debate. The second one is ensuring that school psychologists have support like supply money and legislative days to complete paperwork. So this is more of like they need the days and the time and the resources to do the things that they should. The last one is we want to support training of new school psychologists in Utah through a Grow Your Own Style program. And as some of you probably are aware, there's a pilot program this year for that is for teachers and for school counselors. So what we're hoping is that we can either be added to that, or there might be a separate bill regarding just school mental health professionals, which would include school social workers as well. So these are our priorities and the things that we'll most likely be urging you to go speak to your representatives about, saying, please support this bill that brings us to this end, right? That brings us more school psychologists that stay or come to Utah to serve students and teachers. So when thinking about your stories, you know, and what you're going to say, I would say focus on that, right? Like maybe it's about, I work in a school district where I had this many people leave because they, you know, had a better opportunity somewhere else. Or these students didn't get access to this school psychologist because we couldn't hire someone. For the rural areas, the thing that I'm trying to push is that, and this is true for most educators, people who live in the community already are the ones who are going to stay. So we need to bring training to them. So Grow Your Own really is effective for the areas outside of the Wasatch Front that are the most in need of school psychologists. Because if people already live there, then it's going to be easier for them to stay there and work there. So let's just talk about our priorities for a second. Sarah, after seeing those priorities, is there anything off the top of your head that you would add, about talking to legislators about these priorities?
Well, what I think is brilliant about the way your legislative committee has honed in on 3 priorities is that these are programs that already exist for other educators. And so it is highlighting not the creation of a new program, but broadening an existing program to include a vital player in a school community. Right? And so helping educators make that connection between why you have already done this for whatever national board teachers with the stipend, or why you have decided to grow your own for school counselors. Yes, that they're vital components of a school community. School psychologist is too, and here's why we need to expand that. So that just makes it a very understandable ask. So I think that's great.
Does anybody have any thoughts about these priorities or questions about what that might look like when you're talking to someone about it?
Well, I just thought it was interesting that Shay put in the chat that she says, I was shocked coming from the Midwest that there wasn't a stipend, right? Like that's just, I think that, obviously that's not an experience that I can use, but I think that would be meaningful for legislators to hear. We have psychologists in many states where that is provided, and And I don't know how others feel about it. For me, it's not entirely about the money. It's more about like appreciation for the, you know, the additional work and training that is involved to get that credential, and showing that, yeah, we want highly qualified, well-trained individuals working with our kids, and we're willing to support the professionals that go the extra mile with that credential. So
I think that's a great point, and I think that's a great tactic to take, right? I think legislators don't want to hear about how you want more money, but they do want to hear about how that honors good professionals. It attracts highly qualified school psychologists to work with students. And don't we want highly qualified mental health professionals serving our students' greatest needs in schools? So I think it's, yes, Sterling, like that's an excellent way to think about it.
The other thing I'd throw in there is some people tend to be a little bit more competitive. And I feel like sometimes our politicians tend to have that skill set down of being competitive, and Utah's the best. And so in the past, I was only able to talk about like Colorado, our neighboring states, but many of our neighboring states are offering that now. So Nevada recently did. So I think kind of bringing up of literally our neighboring states and not just saying other states, but Colorado, Nevada, those, I'm going to combine those. I like
I like saying Colorado.
I want to move to Colorado. But really being specific, I think sometimes is that little emotional piece of like, oh, well, Utah's better, that type of piece, and that pride that many of our legislators have.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just have a question, because I'm so interested in the Grow Your Own Style program, being out in Summit County, where there's not very many of us at all. So if somebody were to ask more about how that would start, like what would be the starting point, what do you guys think in terms of that? Like, where does that start?
That's complicated. So we're at a point where there might be two bills about this instead of one. So there might be two, and they're going to have to figure it out and come together on it, which is great because they're from different sides. They're from both parties. So we've over advocated and accidentally put ourselves in a bit of a pickle. But it's great. I'll take it. So they're going to have to figure it out. And to be honest, we've met with the university training programs, and they're at capacity. They cannot produce more seats. So this is like, actually, here's my soapbox. Okay, you asked for it, you're gonna get it. There is no silver bullet, right? And there is no piece of legislation that's going to stop the school psych shortage in Utah. But we have to start somewhere, and this is just one of the somewheres to start. So part of what the university training programs have described to us is that they're not getting students from rural areas because it's really prohibitive for most people to drop their lives for 3 to 5 years, move to the Wasatch Front to get a degree, and then move back to wherever they're from. So grow your own style programs help because it would introduce the idea of a program to people who may not be able to access it due to whatever cost prohibitive parts of it. And then even if they did have to quit their job for the training program, because our training programs are not going to say you can still work and do the program. So our programming is going to be different than the school psychologist, the counselor and the teaching ones, but it does at least offer like some support, and then it at least encourages people to go back to where their school district is funding it. So one of the biggest pieces you can say is it really encourages people to stay in Utah, because the training programs we're describing, they're having a really hard time keeping people in Utah. Like they train people, they only have 6 or 7 graduates, and then 3 of them leave the state because they're either following someone, or they have a better opportunity and they're just not motivated. There's nothing motivating them to stay in Utah unless that's where they're from and where they want to be. So grow your own style things would at least keep people here for a little while longer and hopefully keep them here in the long run. Are there big bugs to work out with training? Yes. Should that prohibit us from moving forward with things? No, is my answer to that. But BYU is a great example. I think everyone can use the BYU training program as an example of how this works, because they have 3 students who are in rural communities right now who are going through training and who will stay there, who live there, who are educators right now, and who are like totally busting their backside to get through our rigorous program and also still work. So all of those students are still working and going through the program. Most of the training programs don't think they can duplicate that kind of training right now, but it's part of, the schematics of things that have to happen. So I think when, if you're having conversations with people like that, you can always tout look at the successes we're having. We're producing 3 school psychologists who are going to stay in places that wouldn't have had a school psychologist otherwise. The second, part of that is going to be that universities are going to need more funding for their own faculty to increase seats for students. That's like going to have to be a separate thing, which we've had great conversations with some lawmakers who want to address that specifically. It just won't happen this year.
I was actually going to say that Summit County, none of us get interns, but when we do, they're going through the BYU program. Yeah. and they're staying, which is good. But yeah, I think the trouble, like we're up in Park City, Eli and I think Eli's still on here. And we can't get interns because we don't pay them and everybody else does. So we can't grow our unit here because we can't attract anybody to see what Park City is like, and which is kind of ridiculous. It's a ski town, but but yeah.
So yes, that was my long answer to your question, was that it's not perfect. So like, you don't need to pretend that it's going to be. But the part of it is it's at least giving the option to school districts, right? Like I would also put it back to lawmakers and say, you're just giving people the option, the choice, right? And let the LEAs decide, right? They love to say this, let the LEAs decide what they want to do. Right now, those bills are only written for teachers and school counselors. Well, what if that LEA doesn't need more school counselors? They want more school psychologists. Like, give them the choice, write it in. Those are great questions, Marcia. Does anybody else have like anticipated questions or things that you can see coming up if you were to talk about this with people?
Okay, I have another question.
Yes.
So
coming,
we're totally out of legislative date. Like we don't get any extra money like all the other teachers do. We're excluded.
Correct.
So if I relate that to my job, like one thing that they did in Park City was they gave us a couple of extra days and pushed us up a lane, but it's still nothing, like almost nothing. So how does that stipend work? Is it substantial, or is it, because I agree with Sterling, it just kind of feels like we get left out of things. And it sort of breeds this culture of like, why would you be a school psychologist? People are just going to put you in a closet and ignore you, Yeah.
And honestly, that's a huge part of the point. Like when I approach people with these things and say like, look, this is what we want. We want a stipend for this, a day for this, and recognition on this bill. Most of the time it's like, and we want those things so we can come to the table to other school psychologists and say, you are valued in this state. People see you and they want you to be part of these school communities. Because then it's not about like a couple $100s, which is important, but not the point of the conversation. It's the point is school psychologists are included and remembered on things. Like talking with Sarah when we kind of first started this whole process with UEA was, will you just include us on the language, like when you say school counselor, also remember to put comma school psychologist. And I know that makes a huge impact on how we feel as school psychologists, as educators. And I think that communicating that to people is important, right? Like, and most people, when I've talked to you about this, most lawmakers are like, oh, well, yeah, that doesn't really make sense that you don't get that. And it's like, well, yeah, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Like, just add us on. You know, there's not that many of us. It's 352 of us in the state. You know, it's not going to cost that much money. So I think that you're exactly, both you and Sterling are exactly on point there, Marcia. It's about making sure as a professional, you are remembered and included on things that will make you more able to do your job for students, right? Like if we're gonna, here's your reframe again, bringing it back to students and teachers. These supplies, these days, these things help me to be the best school psychologist I can be for my students.
I know for myself, Lauren's mentioned this, but just because of my role of, you know, interviewing amazing folks and hiring and offering, or watching amazing folks like Marcia and Eli go to other districts where I'm like, oh, I want to keep you here. But the reality of like being able to say these types of pieces allow me to facilitate and incentivize quality, highly professional folks coming here, staying here, and that by default gives access to so many more students with mental health access immediately, effective teacher instruction and support, parent access, like bringing it instead of kind of in my mind of the whiny for me of like, I want this, I want that. It is frustrating and it does feel a little demoralizing to not have it. But, you know, you can have that moment of like, gosh, it's hard for me to say, no, 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 they can't have it. But if I could say, yes, this is available and this is available, this is how you are seen and this is how it keeps people, it's a different story right there.
I think also to Sarah's point earlier, these are all things that are existing. So it doesn't really matter if we, you know, like feel demoralized or not in the grand scheme of things. These are things that have been proven to attract and retain other educators in the state. So that's the point. Like one of the other big points is, right, if we're working to retain and attract school psychologists, let's use the things we already know that work. Stipends, legislative days, extra time for prep and planning. Like those are things that we're not coming up with anything crazy. I think that's also a really good point to remember, is it's not like we're asking for something huge. We're asking for things that we know already work. Yeah.
And I'll just throw in one thing about the stipend. The national board teachers mobilized through a coalition to get that stipend. That was not something that the legislature just bestowed, right? That was in response to some activism about recognizing national board teachers for that national licensure. And so you're doing the exact right thing of highlighting a need and an existing program and expanding that and then advocating for that. And just waiting for the legislature to get it done, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I think if you guys want to read more in depth about, like, this is an abbreviated version of our priorities. Earlier this year, we put together with help from a bunch of decision makers, a white sheet about UASP shortages. I'll just pull it up and pull it over here for you. And this is too long for you to, like, you know, read to a legislator, but I think it's would be helpful to you to have on hand or to read through it as you're kind of crafting your own stories and ideas, because it talks about, okay, there is no silver bullet. What are our key messages? You know, here's what everybody can do. There's some things that we put are key legislative actions, key USBE actions, and key LEA actions, and key IHE actions. It's a 2-page document, so it's not very long for you to read through it. And you could send it to lawmakers, that's fine. Like, you know, as a follow-up document, you could say, you know what, I have a longer follow-up document if you're interested in it. It's just, you know, 1.5-page document about how all of these things can come together to solve shortages, because it's not going to be a one-stop. You know, I don't know, I'm trying to like mix my sayings together. It's not a one-ring stop show, you know, Friday afternoon. So
Not Colorado.
Colorado. So this document is linked in our 2022 Legislative Toolkit. Which will be sent out to everybody really shortly. So you'll have access to that. And I'll make sure that it's visible, highly visible on the website. I can't remember where it's housed right now. Okay. Lauren?
Can I interject with a question while Sarah's
Yeah.
still here because she's got such expertise?
Yes.
So it's not a question I have. I've already expressed that I've had plenty of fears and used coping skills. But Sarah, what are some things that you've seen of like people's common fears and ways to support that? Or does anybody want to feel bold and say like, this is a concern I have, or anything like that, to get Sarah's wisdom of like bringing down some of the anxiety around a first visit?
Well, you're absolutely right that I hear this every educator day on the Hill, people being nervous. So I try to express how just these are normal people you're talking with, the legislators, right? That they are not professionals in education for the most part. There are some like you. So you really have the expertise. And if they start going down the route of, well, this bill says, or something very specific, you can pivot back to your comfort zone, which is, okay, I don't know the specifics about that, but I know what's happening in my school, and here's what's happening. Or, if they're challenging you on something or asking you to comment on a specific line in a bill or something that is outside of what you feel you're able to comment on, it's that pivot back to, I'm sorry, I really don't know that. I mean, I say that all the time, like, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. I don't really have that off the top of my head, but I know that what we really need to be focused on is, or what I can really share with you is. And so don't feel like you have to necessarily respond to every question, right? In controlling that conversation, if you've got a message you want to share, and you can always follow up with more information or say, I just don't know, or you know what, I'll follow up with an email, that kind of thing. So that's one tip. Another is to buddy up, to have a conversation with 2 or 3 of you there. If there's going to be a group of you coming up to the Hill on the same day, then going out as teams. And you do want to make that connection with who your representative or senator is, because you're the constituent, and that's very influential. But to not do it alone. And we see that a lot. We encourage people to, you're all from the Davis School District, and there's 5 educators here today from the Davis School District, and you're going to tag team your 3 legislators that you're going to try to meet with. And then you have a group conversation that might take some of the anxiety down a little bit too.
I actually did want to ask about that because I live and work in 2 different districts, technically. So like in terms of lawmakers, so where I live and where I work are separate. So does that really, I don't really have to disclose that, do I?
Well, I would, Marcia, I'd prioritize where you vote, where you're a constituent first. So where you live, and build that relationship with that representative and that senator. But if you have the time and the energy and the motivation to absolutely work with the representative and senator of the school district where you're employed, because they have the kids or the family or the connections to that community. And even though you're not their constituent, they care about those schools.
Yeah. Okay.
But you also like your local board, we're talking about our higher up representatives, but don't forget about your local school board also, and your school board, like state school board representative. Those are also key key decision makers that you can start to, make relationships with.
I'll just say something real quick. I don't know why, but it blew my mind when it was explained to me that legislators are taking meetings with people all the time. Like that's one of the big things that they do. Like they're taking meetings with everyone else. Why not me? And it just explain, like, you can reach out to your legislator. You can say, hey, and whether it's related to a bill or not, because, and it's over and over, it's about relationships, right? It's about building relationships with these individuals. And it had never occurred to me that I could just reach out to one of my representatives and say, hey, this is who I am. Is it possible for us to meet? And when I did that, they're like, yeah, let's schedule a meeting. And I went and met with them, and it was anxiety provoking and also weird because they're doing this anyway. They're going to do it with they're going to hear the opinions of other people. It'd be nice if they heard my opinion. They may not agree with me, but yeah, even having that kind of perspective helped me to just, I don't know, I guess get through that a little bit.
They don't know what they don't hear, right? So if they don't hear it, like it's, you know, they may not agree with you, but at least they're hearing it. Like it's there in front of them. They have an opposing opinion or one that reinforces a future decision. So I think that that is also, yeah, like you might not see the immediate, like they might not be like, oh, that's amazing, I'm going to run a bill today, you know, but that down the road will add up. You know, it's like a game of small pieces at a time. Okay.
I am hop off, so I'll let you continue. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Sarah.
The Hill or come to our Thursday evening training, please come up and say hello and remind me that you were in this meeting, and just so I can get to know you. So take care.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
Okay, I will be brief with our last 6 minutes. This last slide is just talking about, we do have the Day on the Hill coming up. We talked about that. For those of you who are not attending, I really want to emphasize you can still advocate, right? Like we just talked about all of these ways that you can reach out and do these things. We've been talking a lot about micro tasks. I don't want the idea of lobbying to become this huge scary thing where you're like, I have to put on a suit and watch Legally Blonde and figure out how to like act and carry myself around decision makers. Like if you want to do that, more power to you. That sounds kind of fun, but you don't have to, right? This can be small things. It can be an email. It can be you know, responding to our emails. It could be downloading Resist Bot. It can be, you know, some of these things that we put in our information that you're like, oh, well, I can take time to do this. Like it doesn't have to be huge, and little things do add up. So I just want to communicate that today too. The last thing I want to talk about are resources. So, and how we communicate with you. The Legislative Committee is put together, every year we put together our toolkit, and we try to send emails about when things are happening and encourage you to do things, but we want to make sure that that's working for you as membership. So I just want to talk about and get some feedback from you guys about what this looks like. Our goals are really to keep you informed, to help guide you, like, so it's not so much like you have to figure things out from square one about what should I be supporting, what should I not, and to help you feel supported. In the past, what we've done has been say, check out UEA's website because they have a great bill tracker. We're not going to track the bills because we're not going to reproduce what they're doing. That's fantastic. Will you guys just unmute, put in the chat, tell us like what has been helpful in the past? How do you like communication? Do you want it to be in an email, weekly? Do you want me to do a video talking about it? Would you prefer like daily reminders? I want to have a small conversation about how we can be helpful for you. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. Do you hate emails? Do you hate videos? What's your opinions?
I personally love the emails because it kind of puts a fire under me a little bit.
Love
to
emails
get
from
things
you.
done, and when the links are provided and stuff like that's so helpful because I can just do it really fast.
Agreed.
What frequency? Sometimes we get a little radio silence, and so we don't know if we're bothering, angering. You got too much on your plate. What is the most efficient for each of you individually on frequency?
Shay says no talking on the phone. Got it. No phone calls.
For me, since it's such a short, I mean, it's 45 days, and because I know how quickly things can go and be voted on, for me, it makes sense to send out the emails as soon as we get the information so that we have a greater chance of having an impact if that's necessary. And especially because I know it's not going to be this way all year long. I hate organizations that send me out like daily activism type emails. That drives me crazy, but if I know it's during the legislative session and it's targeted, I like the immediacy personally.
Would it help if I put in like my emails, a consistent subject line so that you knew it was like a legislative action or update?
I like that.
Just so you can sift through your emails and it delete everybody's email except for mine. Okay, I'm seeing yeses in the chat.
I like the idea, Lauren, of whether it's update or action needed, because I think a lot of us tend to get so many emails, or it's like, I'm going to get back to that, and then oopsie, it's a day later and you didn't get back to it. So something that's bringing up like, this one has action required as soon as possible.
Okay. I'm thinking most of those will fall into the categories of update, action, like recap, or resource, honestly. Okay. I think if I'm hearing the emails are okay, we'll probably stick with that because that's the least complicated for us. At one point, I had said I would be willing to learn TikTok, but I don't think that that's going to be the easiest for me. Email is easiest, you know, lowest cognitive load for me. Maybe at the end of legislative season, we'll do like a final legislative committee TikTok together. I think my last question for everybody before we go is just, do you have any concerns or questions for us while we're still on the line? I really appreciate everybody coming today. I hope that that was helpful and useful. But any I just want to hear any feedback or burning thoughts or things as we go into this legislative season, or fears or hopes from anybody before we sign off.
I want to say thank you to Lauren and the whole legislative group, and most importantly to every single one of you that's participating that's not a board member. The fact that you're here and present speaks so much about you as a professional. I don't mean that to say that your colleagues who aren't here aren't. They're busy with kiddos. So my ask would be, if you found any bit of value in this, please let them know there was this occurred, and we'll have that recording that they can watch at their leisure. You know, do it while you're on the bike or on the treadmill, or, you know, walking the dog on the ear pods. I think the more that can hear this and the more we ignite each other in this, each of the voices that we have make a difference with our legislators. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thank you. And you also, any emails that we send regarding legislative things, you can forward to whomever you want, right? Like, I think when I sent that survey at the beginning of the year, we had great responses because I think everybody was sending it to everybody, regardless of them being a US member. You don't have to be a US member to advocate. So like, send this to everybody. It could be your neighbor too. Like, not just school psychologists have to advocate for school psychologists. Like, start bugging people in your life to help you with this too. So feel free to forward those emails wherever you want them to go. And that, I will say bye-bye, because it's 3:02 and everybody wants to leave. It's Friday. So, okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you guys.